The year is 1814. Napoleon has just been defeated and Norway was handed over to Sweden. Many Norwegians wasn't happy with the fact that they were offered to Sweden as a gift, and many began to see the handover to Sweden as a perfect opportunity to become an independent nation. And a group of 112 men met in Eidsvoll to write Norway's constitution. The Norwegians had dreamed about an independent nation for centuries, and something called national romance began to be more and more popular as the years went by. This included Norwegian patriotic poems and paintings. When Napoleon was defeated and Denmark was forced to give Norway to Sweden, people saw an opportunity to be an independent nation. They was especially motivated by the discontent with Britain's offer to Sweden. The wish for independence was also powered by Denmark's crown prince, Christian Frederick. He offered himself to be the new king of Norway. Christian Frederick's motive was to make Norway a part of Denmark again, with more autonomy for Norwegians the day he would inherit the Danish throne, and set up a meeting in the Norwegian village of Eidsvoll on February 16. He met a lot of opposition against his plans from Georg Sverdrup and others on the meeting, and he suggested to Christian Frederick that he should create a constitutional assembly which would approve or disapprove his request to be the king of Norway. Christian Frederick accepted this, and he announced that the election of the National Assembly will take place during the next 8 weeks. After the election was completed, Christian Frederick created an oath to the independence which every member of the new National Assembly had to take. Norway's independence movement was not received well in Sweden, and the Swedish crown prince threatened that Sweden would do anything in their power to fulfill the deal with the British, also when it came to military force. Christian Frederick and the Norwegians decided to ignore the threats, but they realized that they had limited time. They had to create a constitution and elect the representatives for the church. Christian Frederick had limited time, and that independent Norway had to be created before Sweden had moved the troops back to Sweden. Christian Frederick decided to hold a new meeting at Eidsvoll from April 10th to May 20th, 1814. The most important thing with the meeting was to create a constitution. The work with the constitution began on April 20th. They decided that the National Assembly should be called Stortinget. When the British pledged Sweden to support their promise to Sweden, the work on the constitution became more intensely. The constitution was completed on May 17, 1814. Norway declared independence, a Norwegian flag was created, and Christian Frederick was elected the new king of Norway. May the 17th is today Norway's national day. Sweden was furious, and they threatened once again to go to war. Christian Frederick tried to negotiate with the British on Norway's future, but Great Britain did not give any warranty about an independent Norway. The negotiations didn't lead to any breakthrough, and when the Swedish army had returned to Sweden in June 1814, they began a preparation for an invasion of Norway. The war started on July 26, 1814. The Norwegian army was weak, and there was no match for the well-trained Swedish army. The war ended with Swedish victory on August 14, 1814, and a personal union with Sweden was created. Norway had now much more autonomy than it had under Denmark, and Stortinget was allowed to continue their existence. A new flag for the union was created. Karl of Sweden died in 1818, and his son, Karl Johan, became the new king of Sweden. Karl Johan was one of the people which wanted the union between Norway and Sweden the most, and because of this he was very critical of Norwegian independence ideas. It was also tensions between Stortinget and Karl Johan. Stortinget decided to create a new Norwegian flag, since the flag at the time was very similar to the Danish flag. Stortinget created a committee with 18 people which should decide how the new flag should look like. The most splitting issue between the committee members was if the flag should be in red in reference to the former union with Denmark, or blue in the reference to the union with Sweden. They agreed in the end that the flag should be consisting of a white cross with red rectangles in the corners and a blue cross within the white cross. The flag was approved by Stortinget, and the flag was adopted on July 13, 1821. It wasn't any castles in Christiania. Karl Johan wanted to have a castle to stay in when he visited Norway, and ordered the construction of a brand new castle in 1824. The street nearby the castle was named after Karl Johan. May the 17th became Norway's national day, and Norwegians began to celebrate it every year. Karl Johan didn't like the celebration, mainly because of their celebration of Christian Frederick and the original constitution, and Karl Johan made it illegal to celebrate May the 17th. However, this didn't stop the Norwegians from celebrating it, and the celebration became more and more popular every year. In 1828, he placed 2,000 soldiers around Christiania, and the national day was celebrated more discreet. This was not the case in 1829. May the 17th was now on a sunny Sunday in 1829, and a steamboat, DS Constitution, arrived in Christiania. People cheered when the boat arrived in the harbor, and several national anthems was sung by the people. This was too much for Karl Johan, and he ordered the police to spread the crowd with support from the Viceroy von Platen. The police failed to spread the crowd, and the military was ordered to the square. They didn't shoot on the crowd, but some of the people in the crowd was ridden down, and the military began to hit the crowd with rifles. This event is known as the Battle of the Square. The Norwegians was furious when they heard about this, and Karl Johan met a lot of opposition. Karl Johan agreed to lift the prohibition on the celebration of May the 17th in order to diffuse tensions. Stortinget became more powerful after Viceroy von Platen's death in 1829. A new Viceroy wasn't appointed by Sweden, so the finance minister Collett took over the leadership of the Norwegian autonomous government. The tensions between Stortinget and Sweden began once again in 1836. Some members of Stortinget wanted Norway to appoint their own ministers. Collett told Karl Johan on May the 16th that Stortinget would celebrate May the 17th together with the people. Karl Johan didn't have time to protest the action. Stortinget did also demand that Karl Johan should address himself as the King of Norway and the King of Sweden when he discussed cases which was about Norway. Karl Johan didn't like this demand, and dissolved Stortinget on July the 8th. Stortinget was restored short after. It was also tensions between the peasants and Sweden. The peasants wanted to have local autonomy, and there was a big player in the tensions between Sweden and Norway. Karl Johan died in 1844, and his son Oscar became the new King of Sweden. Oscar was much more tolerant about Norwegian nationalism, and agreed to address himself as the King of Norway and Sweden when he discussed Norwegian matters. He approved two new flags for the Union, the Swedish Union flag and the Norwegian Union flag. He put a common symbol in the upper left rectangle in both the Norwegian and Swedish Union flag, so people knew that this was the flag of the Union of Sweden-Norway. The Norwegians nicknamed the common symbol Sildesalaten, or the herring salad. The construction of the castle in Christiania was completed in 1849. Something called Scandinavism was on the rise when Oscar became king. The people which supported this ideology stated that all of the Scandinavian people consisted of three ethnicities, which at one point in history was the same people. The thought behind this was peace and neutrality in foreign conflicts. This neutrality idea came to be because of Denmark's concern about Prussia and the union of Sweden-Norway's concern about Russia. Oscar died in 1859, and his son Karl XV became the new king of Sweden. Karl embraced Scandinavism and worked for Scandinavian independence policies, security and neutrality. However, he didn't manage to fulfill the neutrality idea in Scandinavia when Denmark went to war against Prussia in 1864, where they fought over Schleswig and Holstein. Karl joined Denmark in the war and sent an army of 15,000 men, including 3,000 Norwegian men, to Denmark. Denmark lost the war and was forced to give Schleswig and Holstein to Prussia. Sweden was not forced to give up any territories. Karl became popular in Norway due to his informal and non-royal behavior. Karl died in 1872, and his brother Oscar II became the new king of Sweden. Oscar didn't tolerate Norwegian nationalism as much as Oscar I did, but he didn't oppose it as much as Karl Johan did. The parliamentarism was introduced in the Norwegian autonomous government in 1884 against Oscar's will, and the political party Venstre was formed as Norway's first political party ever. The political party Høyre was formed some months later. Venstre's leader Johan Sverdrup was appointed as the new prime minister of the autonomous autonomous Norway. Tensions between Norway and Sweden began once again when Norway demanded to have their own consulate. During the election to Stortinget in 1891, did Venstre demand a Norwegian consulate in order to secure Norwegian trading interests. A demand for a Norwegian foreign minister was also raised during this time. Høyre and King Oscar opposed this because they feared that this would destroy the union between Sweden and Norway. The foreign policy was the only thing which Sweden and Norway shared. Oscar responded to the increasingly more popular demand by abolishing Mellomriksloven, a law which regulated trade and ship movements between Sweden and Norway. The idea of a Norwegian consulate became more and more popular, and Høyre, which earlier opposed this idea, did also begin to embrace this idea. Høyre won the election for Stortinget in 1903 and began to negotiate with Sweden about the possibility for a Norwegian consulate, but the negotiation failed. When the negotiations failed, the ideas of an independent Norway began to take form again.